Happy Thursday, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Fantasy Football Night in America for March 13th, 2025. This is the Fantasy Football Players Championship high-stakes fantasy football show on the Better Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman, at Eric Balkman on the X. You know me from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and, of course, the FFPC over at myffpc.com. Pleased to be welcoming in a Dynasty legend, a guy that you hear on the Dynasty League Football podcast, a guy that you follow already on the X, at Matt Price FF. It is Matt Price. Matt, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. This is going to be a lot of fun. Welcome aboard, man.
Yeah, man, I'm so excited to be here. I've played in the FFPC format for a long time, listened to this pod quite a bit as well. So excited to be on it and chop it up with you tonight, Eric.
So, you know, you and I have never worked directly together before, ever, but I've always been a fan of you, and I wanted to get you on this show. Glad that we made it happen. One of the things I never knew 100% about you, because I know you're the zookeeper on X, right?
Yeah.
And so for the longest time, I'm like, what does this mean? Because I know you DLF guys, you're all OGs, right? Does this mean like there was some sort of, you know, animal thing that you got into on the podcast? Was this something that you guys did when you were right? I didn't know. I had no idea. And so I did some more research into it. You are a 100% bona fide, real life, actual zookeeper, which is the first, like, you're the first person I've not only ever had on the show who's a zookeeper. You're the first zookeeper I've ever met in real life. So number one, top of the show, and I know it's not fantasy football centric. How long have you been doing that, and how did you get into DLF? Because you've been doing this for a long time too.
Yeah, I've been a zookeeper for April will actually be 25 years in the field. I'm at my current organization. I'm not allowed to say, but you could probably figure it out. It's a very large, well-known zoo, world famous zoo in the southwest corner of the United States. You can probably figure that out. I've been there for about 15 years. We have all kinds of PR stuff we're not allowed to talk about. I get it. Whatever. Yeah. But you know, without mentioning that, you can figure it out. And as far as DLF, I've been with them since 2015. I actually got my start in the industry with a tiny little site. Actually, it's probably not that tiny from the hockey standpoint. It's called Dauber Hockey, I believe, and they wanted to open up a football section. They hired me to do draft guides and all kinds of stuff for them. They decided they wanted to focus on the hockey side of things. So that's not, I mean, I watch hockey, but I certainly have never played fantasy hockey. Applied for DLF, talked to Eric Dickens. He liked what I had written and things like that. And they brought me on, did nothing but write for several years. And then, gosh, I don't even know how long it's been at this point. Probably at least 8 years or so. I've been on the DLF Dynasty podcast with Dan Myler and, of course, the Godfather, Ryan McDowell. And it's a blast just getting to talk to those guys every single week. You know, a lot of us that are this sick about this game, like we just don't have people in our real life that we can talk about, that they just don't understand how exciting it is when DK Metcalf gets sent or Geno Smith moves on or whatever, you know, and to be able to talk to people like you and of course my co-hosts on the DLF Dynasty podcast every week is just a nice outlet for me. And we would probably do it even if we weren't doing it for a site. We probably get together once a week and chat about it anyway. So it's been a blast.
And that's the thing. I think that is kind of underrated. You know, this time of year, I think, you know, we do this show and obviously we'll talk rookies tonight or the upcoming rookie class. But I think that the thing that's underrated, especially when you get into Dynasty 301 and Dynasty 401, it's like, especially with free agency, every single move, there is a counter move that you can make in your Dynasty league. Now, whether that's the right one or wrong one, listen, I've probably been wrong more than I've been right. So over the course of, you know, playing Dynasty for, I don't even know how many years I've been playing Dynasty, but it's well over a decade, probably coming up on 2 decades. I want to ask you just at the top of the show, as far as Dynasty fantasy football, were you a quick convert from like regular fantasy football to like, hey, I got to see what this Dynasty aspect is all about? Because you've been doing Dynasty for a long time. And I feel like with some people, I know I've talked to a lot of high stakes players in the FFPC where they'll play just redraft for 5-10 years. They're like, oh, I'll check out Dynasty. And then they're hooked immediately, right? Some people, it's quick where they play fantasy football via the redraft aspect for a year. And then like, well, try Dynasty right away. Sometimes it's a long drawn out process. How was it for you? Because I'm assuming you started with redraft and then moved over to or added Dynasty into your portfolio.
Yeah, my very first fantasy actually started as a fantasy basketball player. And you've got so many games, and there's so many moves to make every single day in those style of leagues, and it just became a little bit too much on a day-to-day basis. So I moved over to football. My first fantasy football league, I think, was in like 95, 96, something like that, my last year of high school. And it only took a few years before I just decided that I want more control over my teams. I don't want to draft, oftentimes in redraft, you draft a team, you lose like 4 players in the first 3 weeks, and you're like, nobody wants to trade with me. What do I do for the rest of the season? And Dynasty, you can switch gears. Like, oh, this season's out. It's time to play for the following season. You start making moves. You move maybe injured veterans for rookie picks and things like that. You can kind of just reset your whole team, and you really get to kind of have the feeling of that you're a GM of your team. You have the same team year to year, unless you're making moves through trades and rookie drafts and things like that. And it just really appealed to me much more as somebody who has always paid a ton of attention in the offseason. We've got the rookies, we got the combine, and then the rookie draft, and then we have our dynasty rookie drafts, and then we have OTAs and off-season workouts, and then we get to the preseason. There's just so much going on all the time. And in fact, I found myself really enjoying like the scouting aspect of rookies and things like that, all the stuff that goes on the off-season, all of the awesome FA news where we get to see where all these veterans are going into new teams and how they're going to fit in. This part of the game is really more enticing to me than clicking a few boxes on a thing and letting things play out. I want to know all the information I possibly can. And things are obviously harder these days, right? In the early 2000s, late 90s, like, there was maybe 1 or 2 sites. There was like Football Guys. That was the site that I went to, that I started learning. And now there's just so much content and everything out there. So it's harder to have that kind of informational edge on your opponents in the age of the internet, So having that off season to really dial in and really figure out what you want to do for the following season, how you feel about players and situations and values, because a lot of dynasty format is also about player values. It's not just about production of what they're going to do in the in season, right? So all of that stuff kind of coalesces in the off season, and that's really where I have the most fun with this game.
I think that you bring up an interesting point, because back in the day, 15, 20 years ago, Adam Schefter was not a household name. We didn't know who Ian Rappaport was, right? You really had to hunt and scout for all this information on the internet, and or even in the early stages of the internet, right? And I think now, because the information that we and our fellow league mates are craving, it's out there for everybody. And I'm guilty as anybody about this. Like, I understand. And this is something that I adopted probably about 15 years or so ago, where I lived in my own echo chamber for the longest time, Matt, where I would go on X or Twitter back then. I would go there and I'd be liking and retweeting stuff I agreed with, and the stuff I didn't agree with, I just ignore, right? Because I didn't want to hear opposing opinions, right? And then I realized, you know what? I feel like once you open your mind up to the opposing point of view, even if you disagree with it, I think it helps you understand things better. And so for me, now in the age when all the information is out there for everyone, I go to sites like DLF, especially DLF, who's been doing this, since the Reagan administration, essentially. Like that they will bring up a viewpoint I hadn't considered, or they will tell me not how to think, but they will tell me, whatever writer I'm reading or you listen to on the DLF podcast, you'll explain to me why you value this player this way, or why you think this is the proper way to handle a trade, or what have you. Like, and it's really good to get that input and that expertise for people who've been doing this not only for a long time, but doing it a lot for a long time. So I think now in the day and age when, you can get this info anywhere, it's always good to be going to sites like, again, I'm not trying to turn this into a Dynasty League Football commercial, but I'm telling you, like, this helps you. This helps you as an owner, whether you agree with what Matt's saying, whether you disagree. I think it's always important to, not only have that information instantly, but get an instant reaction and then get a nuanced reaction too.
Yeah. And, like you said, this day and age, like sometimes you get these managers that just want to be told what the right answer is. And you have to realize that even the very best of us are right 60% of the time at a maximum. You know, if you've done this, you've been in this industry giving advice or whatever, writing, podcasting, you've been wrong probably a lot more than you've been right. You know, hopefully you're about half and half. The very best of us are about 60%. And really, like, the most fun part of producing content, in my opinion, is being able to teach people how to develop their own process. We give the information and give information on how we value, whether it's me valuing running quarterbacks or valuing separation throughout running at wide receiver or whatever. We have to look. You have to kind of process that information and then figure out what you think about that. You can disagree with me and you might be right. But, you know, having that ability to kind of critical think for yourself instead of just relying on, oh, Matt said to start Cooper Kupp this week and he did nothing and he sucks because of that. That, you know, anybody can be right or wrong on any given play. You know, like an entire fantasy day can be made or lost on one play. Like, you know, a fingertip grab that didn't hit for an 80-yard touchdown can cause you a loss for the week. So the ability to develop your own process based on the information that we put out there or wherever you want to get your information is such a valuable skill in this game, so that you don't feel like you have to rely on any single person or source and you can make your own decision. Because after all, we can tell you whatever one, and maybe we're going to be right, even if we were right 100% of the time, which would never happen. But you are the one that has to click that box next to that players every single week. So in the end, it's your responsibility. And if you learn how to process the information that's out there, you know, you're going to be better off for it. And I think it's going to make your experience as a player much more richer and deeper.
It's your team, right? I mean, It is your team. Like, you can take advice from everybody. I always say too, I'm glad you said the 60%. I've said for years that if anybody is hitting like yes or no's or correct calls more than 60% of the time, you are a fantasy Hall of Famer. No ifs.
You should be betting every week. You should be betting. You should be making money every single week if you are better than 60%. Yeah.
I think that's important to understand. And I never really thought about the whole creating your own model or creating your own process. Like, I think that's really important. And once you do that, then and then we're always constantly refining it, right? Like, nothing's ever set in stone. You're always modifying, changing, improving, evolving.
Yeah, and you mentioned, you know, like your mistakes and stuff earlier. Like you learn more from your mistakes than your successes, right? If you make all the right moves one year and you win the championship, whatever, you're just like, yeah, I do it out. I figured out this game. And then the next season comes and you try the same thing. And it just, you know, it could be a very different outcome, right? So we've all gone through that kind of process. So you're just kind of constantly fine tuning. You know, this year one thing worked, maybe next year it's not going to work. Maybe the defense at this point is the NFL defense at this point are getting smaller. So we're going to more emphasize big running backs and things like we're going to have in this year's rookie class. Maybe the following years they're getting bigger. They're getting bigger on the outside to combat large wide receivers. And now we have this evolution of these smaller wide receivers just destroying the fantasy world, right? So it's just a constant ebb and flow in the NFL, and we have to learn how to adjust to that.
We're going to be talking tonight on the show, obviously, about a free agency and the seismic shifts that were made over the course of the last 4 or 5 days. We're going to focus on the rookie wide receivers tonight, and we'll also get into some rookie running back conversations as well. I think the majority of the portion is probably going to be, this will probably be a heavy first hour with free agency. But here's the thing. Whether it's rookies, whether it's veterans, they all funnel back to Dynasty. And if you're looking to apply the advice that Matt will be dispensing tonight, and me to a certain extent, but mostly Matt, go to myffpc.com. Dynasty Orphans are there available right now. Entry fees range from $77 up to $5,000. So whatever your price point is, we've got a budget for you there. A lot of those teams have had their entry fees lowered for 2025 as well. In the course of 15 plus years of doing Dynasty with the FFPC, we've never had a Dynasty League fold. That's over 1,800 leagues as well. Check it out, myffpc.com. While you're there, check out the Big Gorilla Tournament, $1 million grand prize, $350 entry fee. You're going to get a $50 discount for every third team you buy. Drafts have been going off both live and slow. Right now, the early Rampage tournament is off. So right now, if you're entering to play for that $1 million grand prize, you're automatically going to have that team entered in the early Rampage tournament, which is going to award a $10,000 grand prize. And the 7 Bananas promotion is live. You want to try to see if that randomizer keeps giving you that 7 pick multiple times in a row. And if you get all the way up to 5 times in a row, I've already had people get it 2 or 3 times in a row. If you get all the way up to 5 times in a row, Jungle Safari for 4, paid for by the FFPC. Check that out. MyFFPC.com. Be awesome if you win a jungle safari and $1 million grand prize this year. The Never Too Early Best Ball and the Never Too Early Superflex Best Ball tournaments going on at MyFFPC.com. $40,000 and $10,000 grand prize, respectively. Tournaments are running all the way up to April 24th, which is the first day of the NFL draft. Drafts are available with a 30-second, 60-second, 2-hour, and 6-hour clock. Check that out, myffpc.com. For the Big Gorilla, Dynasty Orphans, Dynasty Startup starting next month. I think I can say that. Pretty sure I can say that. Dynasty Startups starting with the FFPC next month. And then, of course, the Never Too Early tournaments. Okay, so let's get into, and I probably should have put this in order of what I wanted to talk about, but we'll get to all this eventually. I don't know about you, Matt, but last year when it came, well, no, I'll tell you this. Let's do this. Let's take Tom's question on YouTube right now. I know he's been waiting patiently. Let's talk about the Colts quarterback situation right now. He wants to know about the quote-unquote competition going on with Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson in Indy right now. He says Daniel Jones doesn't seem to help to figure anything out on who starts for the quarterback or starts at quarterback for the Colts. Yikes. Does anyone in the dynasty world actually believe in Anthony Richardson? I have a couple of thoughts. Matt, I don't know how deep you've gone into the Anthony Richardson player evaluation heading into the 2025 season, but your thoughts not only on Richardson, but as well as how you think this Colts quarterback competition is going to shake out by week 1 of the start of the year.
Yeah, for Anthony Richardson, I was a big fan coming out. I just feel like if you can find that quarterback that not only passes but has that rushing component, that's your formula for having a top 5 quarterback in fantasy. I mean, look at the top 5 every year. It's littered with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts, all Jaden Daniels. Now, these guys are producing a nice floor for you with their running, and when the passing hits as well, then you have that blow off top that just gives you like a week winning kind of score on its own, especially in Superflex if you're able to acquire the 2 of those guys. Now, Anthony Richardson, like the rushing upside is there, but we haven't really seen the passing come along. You cannot be a successful NFL quarterback if you're throwing less than 50% completion percentage, right? To those short and intermediate areas of the field with the way today's game is being played with a lot of short stuff with all that too high safety, taking away a lot of deep stuff. Anthony Richardson thrived in college and in his short time as a starter there at Florida by running the ball and throwing the ball deep, right? Those are his 2 things. And those are 2 major producers of fantasy points. But if you're not completing those easy passes, then you're going to struggle a little bit from an NFL perspective. And if you're not starting from an NFL team, you can't score any fantasy points, right? So that said, I'm certainly not selling low. I think maybe my co-hosts might disagree with me on the DLF Dynasty podcast. They might disagree, but I'm team ceiling. The way I play this game is for ceiling. If I'm not first, I'm last, right? So the worst place you can be in Dynasty is in the middle. And these kind of quarterbacks, if they hit their true ceiling, then you're going to be probably towards the top of that, depending on the rest of your roster, right? So with Anthony Richardson, we have to remember this guy is very young. He only, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but he has a very few number of starts going back to college, right? If you conclude all of his starts, it's not that many. So this is a guy that needs to continue to develop. We saw lots of concerning things last year. I'm not going to lie, where they was talking about the game where he took himself out of the game. You just can't do that as an NFL player. So they had to do something. And Joe Flacco, he's just not going to provide the level of competition. Anthony Richardson knows in the back of his head, somebody like Joe Flacco, he's old. He's not going to be there forever. If I just wait, they're going to come back to me, that kind of thing. And Daniel Jones, while he's not the most exciting or accomplished quarterback, if he can run the Shane Steichen offense, with Anthony Richardson has struggled to do to this point, then that's going to light a fire under Anthony Richardson, or you would hope he would. And if it doesn't, then there's your answer. If Daniel Jones beats out Anthony Richardson for the starting job in week 1, then we have our answer with Anthony Richardson. Your job as a dynasty manager is to decide if you want to wait for that. I mean, his value is at an all-time low right now. You can get out and get something for him in Superflex leagues. I'm not even sure you can get a second-round pick for him at this point. If you can and you want to get out, that's a good price to target. In a 1 quarterback league, I'm not sure you can get really anything for him. So you might as well just keep him on your roster as long as you're not running up against roster limits and things like that. So I'm still holding out hope for Richardson. You're going to give him 1 more year to try to put this thing together. As far as Daniel Jones go, I mean, nobody is excited about him, but he has had successful years. I would say that his most successful year, he was mostly hidden rather than featured in that offense, but he has some rushing upside too, right? So there's potential there. My advice for Daniel Jones, like if you can get him as a throw-in in trade, I mean, you see what happens. I think there is a situation where, you know, Anthony Richardson comes out and plays 4 or 5 games to start. And if the Colts are 1-4, 2-3, whatever it is, then they're probably going to go to Daniel Jones for a little while. If he has success, maybe they stay with him. If he's terrible, maybe they go back to injury. So it's going to be kind of a roller coaster, right? But you have to keep your eye on the absolute ceiling. And if you hit with that rushing ability, with the potential for double-digit rushing touchdowns, and you get those occasional 250-yard, 250 to 300-yard passing games with a couple of touchdowns thrown in there, that's when you're going to get that top 5 ceiling. So it's a very difficult problem. Maybe one of the most difficult in Dynasty right now. But for me personally, I'm holding on Anthony Richardson. I'm not selling him right now for what he's going for.
I'm totally with you, and I run my Dynasty leagues the same way. Like it's the Ricky Bobby theory of Dynasty, right? Like I want elite everywhere, and if I miss, okay, but I'm going to continue taking those home run swings. Was talking about Christian Kirk. I think it was last week or the week before on this show, and I said, like, look, I don't really have a reason to have him on my roster. He's never going to be a top 12 guy. Yeah, he's a fill-in guy, but I'd rather have my fill-in guys be young and have the upside. Christian Kirk is not going to be a league winner, a top 10 or top 12 guy for the remainder of his career. That's just fact. So I'd be much more likely to sell him off, or in the FFPC, for those players playing in that, like when you got to cut down, like Kirk might be a cap or not a cap casualty, but just a casualty of having to cut down. I think that Richardson, to me, the upside is still good enough where I want him on my roster. I'm not cutting him. I'm not trading him. I want to see how this plays out. I mean, I shouldn't say I'm not trading him. I just don't imagine I'm going to get fair value for him right now, the way I value him. What about the rest of the Colts pass catchers? You know, we've seen Ty Warren mocked to the Colts in a ton of mock drafts so far. They already have Pittman. They have Alec Pierce on that team, Josh Downs, obviously Jonathan Taylor. Who's better for those skill position guys? Is it Richardson or is it Jones?
I mean, in their current version, I mean, I hate to say it, but in the current version, it feels like it's Jones, because a lot of those guys, especially, you know, if they bring in Ty Warren, I think Michael Pittman qualifies. You know, Josh Downs can certainly run deep, but that's Richardson's strength, is throwing the ball deep. It's clear that he struggles to consistently complete passes in the 5 to 15 yard area of the field, right? And those guys that the Colts have built up, they thrive in that area outside of Josh Downs a little bit. You know, he's primarily a slot player, but he can certainly go deep. And Alec Pierce, we know, is more of a deep threat. So I mean, it feels bad to say, but Daniel Jones is better in that aspect. So you know, we'll see what they do in the draft here. We'll see what they continue to do as free agency rolls on. But it feels, from a weapon standpoint, if they were to bring in a player like Ty Warren, then it might be Daniel Jones. Now, if they decided to bring in somebody like Matthew Golden or a bigger player like Ted McMillan, somebody like that, then, you know, that kind of, to me, feels like it fits a little bit better with Richardson's skill set.
Let's get into the rest of the news that has popped up over the course of the last 4 days. I'm going to go to dynastyleaguefootball.com for all this knowledge. And something that happened, what was this, earlier today? I think it was earlier today, this morning. Raheem Mostert has found a new home. He is moving from Miami to Las Vegas as he will join the Raiders. I look at this where Mostert essentially, and I think this might be a recurring theme here, Matt, tonight. Yeah. Mostert essentially jumps to the front of the depth chart in Las Vegas. He is joined in that running back room with the Raiders with such luminaries like Sincere McCormick, as opposed to lying Zamir White, who is also on that roster. Dylan Lobby is there. Isaiah Spiller, remember him? Yeah, I do. Yeah. I wasted plenty of rookie draft picks
too.
On him. They're all on this roster. Doesn't this just mean this signing of Mostert means avoid everybody right now in that Raiders backfield? This seems like Tom Brady and Pete Carroll and company are lining up for, and John Spytek, who I can't remember if I mentioned on the show, I played high school football against way back in the day, who's the new GM of the Raiders. I'm not sure if that's a humble brag or not. It's just a weird flex. So take that for what it's worth. But are they just like lining this up? Like, yeah, we're taking a running back early, and he's going to be the bell cow. Because I just look at all these supplementary pieces on this team: Mostert, McCormick, White. None of these guys are 3-down guys. I think the Raiders are loading up to draft a 3-down guy, whether that's in round 1, in what do they pick, 6th or something like that. They pick in the top 10, and then whether they skip that and then draft in round 2. I think like this is the hot spot. Say what you will about the Raiders offense, but whoever they draft on in round 1 or round 2, and I'm assuming it's going to be one of those rounds based on their free agency behavior, this is going to be a huge honeypot in rookie drafts. Regardless of how good the offense is, there's going to be a ton of volume, a ton of opportunity for whoever they draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is the class to do it. You know, they gave up their 3rd round pick to go get Geno Smith, right, to upgrade the quarterback position. I know, Geno has, his haters and all that, but if you look at what they had last season, Geno is just a massive upgrade. Even if he's a league average quarterback, I think he's slightly better than league average, but even if he's league average, that's, miles better than what they had last season. And this running back class, like you said, it's just chock block full. Whether you want to go, you probably don't want to go there in round 1, but this is Pete Carroll, right? Pete Carroll likes to run the football. There was a constant. Well, the reason why we had that saying, let Russ cook, was because Pete Carroll just wanted to keep running the football, right? So now Chip Kelly is there, and he's known as kind of this passing game guru in some respects. But if you look at what he did last year at Ohio State, the running game was front and center there, right? So I think that's probably going to be the lean of their offense. I think and they're going to need somebody more than Raheem Mostert or anybody else on that roster to kind of accomplish that. So I don't think they're going to go with Jeanty at 6, but there's going to be plenty of guys littered throughout this draft. We're going to find running backs. Typically we want 1st or 2nd down running backs. 1st round running backs are now very rare in the NFL draft. 2nd round is like the new 1st round for running backs, but we're probably going to get 1 or 2 of those guys in the 1st round this year. But the 3rd round, you're going to find great backs. So you might find Cam Scatterbo there, somebody like that in the slip into the 3rd round. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities for them to do that. And just in general, from a dynasty's perspective, there are very few backfields that I would be buying into at this point. In fact, I would say 95% of the backfields the players that I have on my roster, I'm selling off if I can, because this running back class is going to wreck dreams. You might think you're set at running back right now. You are not set at running back right now unless you have the Bijan Robinsons, those and the really truly elite guys, Saquon, all of those guys. You are not safe. This class is going to destroy your hopes and dreams. So I expect these guys, especially the Raiders, they're not going to run out there with a 32. Is he 33 this year? Raheem Mostert. So that's not going to be their primary. He may get veteran deference and all that. Pete Carroll does like to do that, but at some point he's either going to break down or be ineffective, and they're going to need to make a change. And if they draft somebody highly, it might be pretty quickly.
I remember back in 2021, Matt, there was this was my local radio station. We did a draft special where we broadcast the 1st round on Thursday night, and it was kind of like a Madden cast, but audio only on the radio, right? And so this was the Trevor Lawrence year where he went 1 overall. We were all in separate locations. We couldn't be at the studio because we still had lockdowns going on. And I remember I had James Robinson in like 3 or 4 dynasty leagues, like some of my like higher end dynasty leagues that I play in. And I felt pretty good about, hey, Jacksonville's going to invest in Lawrence. They're going to give him weapons, whatever. And I remember being on the air that night, and the Jaguars had 2 first-round picks. And the 2nd pick, they utilized that pick on a running back named Travis Etienne, which torpedoed all my James Robinson shares, right? And I just remember I don't know how I didn't swear on the air that night. The FCC should have come calling. They didn't, and I somehow avoided it. And I feel like that is one example of what's going to happen, not only to one team in next month at the NFL draft. It's going to happen to multiple teams. If you think that you are locked and loaded with an RB, like a top a top 12 running back, top 15 running back, let me disavow you of that notion right now because of this year's class and how talented it was. That 2021 class was nothing compared to what we have in 2025. So there is going to be a lot of torpedoing of backfields that night. And that was going to be my next question, but you already answered it. Not only are you not buying, you are actively selling the pieces that you have of these veterans in these backfields right now.
Yeah, I would say, let me just look at the list. I would say if I'm not selling Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Achane, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor.
The Holy Trinity I always hear. And I think Barkley is kind of like, personal preference, but I always hear Robinson. I always hear Jahmyr Gibbs, and I always hear Barkley. And then, I hear some Breece Hall of selling of him, Jonathan Taylor, so on and so forth. I get it. But those top 5, top 6, I get it. After that, man, open season, like whatever you want to do.
Sell them all. This is I don't think it's necessarily this extreme, but I would say playing the running back position in Dynasty, you should play the running back to put us in a Dynasty pretty similar that you play redraft, outside of those truly elite guys that have the established workload and the contract, and they're just so good that they're not really going anywhere. But Bijan gets hurt, you never know what happens the following year. Maybe Atlanta decides they don't want to re-sign him with one injury. So I just, like, if somebody sends me a valuable offer for a running back and I'm not competing, I'm selling that player. Like, it's just too difficult. These guys lose value too quickly, even the studs at the top. I mean, look at Christian McCaffrey. I know we missed the entire year last year, basically, and he's a little bit older. He's 20. I think he's going to be 29 when the season starts. He's all the way down at running back 12 in our ADP. And even guys like him are just going to fall off. Last year he was number 1 overall, and pretty much every draft, every best ball draft, every draft I did, a redraft kind of league I did, Christian McCaffrey was in the top 1 or 2 picks. If it wasn't him, it was somebody like Tyreek Hill, right? And even those elite guys, they can fall off. So, I mean, unless you are locked in, you're ready to compete this year, you think you're a strong contender, you're going to finish like you're a top 3 to 5 best team, you're locked for the playoffs, like, sell these running backs and get the draft capital. And then once your team is set and you're ready to compete again, that's when you come back and heavy into the running back position.
Do you feel like this time of year, you normally are doing that? Or is this year's class, given how deep and how talented it is, do you think that's influencing you a little bit more to sell off your veteran pieces in your backfield more so than other years?
More so than other years for sure, but it's always a concern. And ideally, you'd be selling these guys. I don't know. I think most people that play in Dynasty leagues probably have trade deadlines. I personally don't like trade deadlines, and you can trade 24/7, even in the playoffs. The ideal time to sell these guys is during the season, towards the end of the season, to the competing teams. If you're not competing, that's when you're going to get maximum value. There's kind of like this inverse bell curve of veteran values in Dynasty, where as you get close to the season, their value starts picking up, because we're about to be in the point scoring part of the Dynasty season, right? Where we need these guys in our lineups, we need them scoring points for us. And as you get to the end of the season, their value kind of crescendos. Once you're done with the season, they kind of plummet, right? And then to me, the value continues to decrease all the way up to your rookie draft. Once that rookie draft hits, now you're on the other side of it. You're heading back towards the start of the season, the point scoring season, and those veteran values are going to start rising. So in general, you want to be kind of selling these guys either after the rookie drafts, or once we really know once we really know where these rookies are landing and we have an idea of the value of these players. But typically, I want to get out of running backs if I know I'm not competing the following year.
When do you feel like the best time is to trade rookie picks? Are we talking about at the end of the playing season? Is that the optimal time to trade for those picks? Or because I know the best time to trade them away is like when you're on the clock or right before the rookie draft.
The best time to acquire them, honestly, is the year before. Like right now, I'm trying to acquire 2026 and 2027 picks. A lot of my leagues go out 2 or 3 years of rookie picks. It's right now where everybody's focused on this class. Sometimes you can trade an early second this year for a first next year. I've seen that trade happen so many times over the last few weeks. Like the cheapest time is going to be the year prior.
I want to get into the actual stuff I put on the rundown tonight that you prepared for, because it just would be bad if we didn't do that. Last year, this is not necessarily a dynasty thing, but last year in redraft season, I was acquiring as much Chris Godwin as I could in drafts.
Sure.
In dynasty, I definitely traded for him as much as I could. I was of the belief that based on the reports coming out of Tampa, like Godwin's going to be used. He was going to be used in the slot, and for PPR leagues, like this was not a cheat code, but this was a way to get a leg up on everybody because his value was depressed. And it worked for a third of the season, roughly, until he got injured and was on the shelf for the rest of the way. Now, we find out this year that he has re-signed with Tampa. Liam Cohen has moved on to Jacksonville, but they promoted, I can't remember his first name, Kevin Grizzard, I want to say, the guy that they promoted internally, which to me suggests, okay, they want to keep everything going the way it had been going the last year or two there with Canales and then Cohen, now with Grizzard. Totally. Like, they're going to continue to utilize Godwin. Mike Evans is another year older. Chris Godwin signs a 3-year deal, $66 million. He is going to be, I want to say he turns 30 this year. I think he's 29 right now. Don't quote me on that. But he is the younger guy in this Tampa Bay passing attack with Baker Mayfield, who looked awesome the last couple of years and looked even better in 2024 than he did in 2023. I'm wondering what you think the perceived value is with Chris Godwin right now. And I know it's different for every dynasty league, but is now the time to be buying for him? Did you already miss the window on Godwin? Is he now going, too high for your likes? Because I think Godwin in 2025 is going to continue the mission he didn't finish this past season, where he is going to crush it. He's going to crush it big time. And this is a guy you want to be in business with. It just all depends upon the price that you have to pay for him.
Yeah, I mean, I would put a second round valuation on a mid-second. Like, that seems fair to me. Like, I'm certainly not paying first for a wide receiver that old. And dynasty, age is a massive thing. Once you hit, and it doesn't necessarily matter in terms of production with the truly elite guys, right? And I think playing in the slot last year, I think Godwin is an elite slot player, but you have to, part of dynasty is not just the production. Again, it's about the value of these players. What are you paying for them? What are you selling them for? If you wait too long to sell them, or is this a player that's going to, die on your roster? If you're fine with that, cool. If you're not, then you probably need to make a move for him. So there's a really nice market, I think, for Godwin right now from both perspectives. Like, this is how you make your money in dynasty, both as a real rebuilder and a competing team, is you find a team that is the opposite, trying to do the opposite of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. If Chris Godwin is on a team that is, you look at their roster and it seems like they're probably not going to compete this year. Now, I will say that sometimes you make the assumption there's no way that this team is competing, but that manager really does believe that they're competing. So there's some caveats to that. But in general, if you can find a rebuilding team and you're a competing team, you can make a deal like this. I would be happy to send Godwin for an early second round pick on a team that was not competing in 2025, right? So that would be the price. I did pull up over at DLF. We have a Dynasty Trade Finder tool that's really pretty awesome. It basically pulls in actual trades happening from my fantasy league, and I think we're working on other formats as well. But you can go on and see exactly when and the format that it was playing in, what trades are being made. So I'll looking over here right now in a Superflex format. The most recent trade happened just yesterday, actually, for Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin and Christian McCaffrey were sent for Saquon Barkley. A couple of days ago, Godwin and ETN were sent for Zay Flowers. Godwin was moved for Tank Bigsby and a 2026 second round pick. So the value is kind of all over the place, but I would say if you average them out, here's a fun one. Chris Godwin straight up for Jalen McMillan. So again,
that is
the
fun.
Future. Are you playing for?
Yeah. Okay. So that's what it comes down to for you. If you're playing for right now, you'd rather have Godwin. If you're playing for the future, you'd take McMillan.
Yeah. And I do have some concern with McMillan, mostly because of the contract that Godwin got. Now, Jalen McMillan can play on the outside. I think he can be successful out there, but honestly, his natural position is more in the slot. And if Godwin, as good as he was last year, stays locked into that slot role, Godwin can also play outside, but he was just so good at it last season that I think the probability, if this is a game of probabilities, right? The higher probability is that Godwin is going to play in the slot and dominate, and then you're going to have Evans and McMillan outside. So you might be able to sell McMillan now and buy him back cheaper at the end of this year. Obviously you're betting on you're making the bet that both Godwin and Evans are both staying healthy on that bet, right? But that's kind of the move. I'm a little bit worried about McMillan holding value at this point, but I do think both of those players are worth about the same. Maybe a little bit, again, Godwin a little bit more to competing teams, McMillan a little bit more valuable to rebuilding teams, but both in that kind of mid-second round range, I would say.
I think that's important to understand too, is the Buccaneers had McMillan, and yet they still paid that money to Godwin.
Exactly.
I think that is meaningful. Tom, breaking news on YouTube tonight. Alexander Mattison joining the Miami Dolphins, which is just scintillating stuff. This is why you watch this show. Thank you, Tom. We appreciate that. Speaking of running backs, that more exciting than Madison, but maybe less exciting than it should be. I'm curious your thoughts on Najee Harris going to the Chargers. This was a guy who was a former first-round pick. I believe he was the first running back chosen in his draft. 28 touchdowns, 4,300 rushing yards in 68 starts in 4 seasons with the Steelers. He has never missed a game due to injury, which is something to be said for.
It's a skill.
Best ability, availability.
Exactly.
And second best, durability. So there's something to be said for Najee Harris. However, not the most explosive guy, not very dynamic as far as pass catching goes. A guy that is, not setting the world on fire as far as yards per carry. He will never be confused with Davante Adams in that category. This is a 1-year deal with the Chargers, and Jim Harbaugh loves running the football there. Your thoughts on Harris going to the Chargers? Because I think there's 2 schools of thought on this. There's plenty of people that believe that they're paying him, what was it, $9.5 million, I want to say? Yeah. They're paying him $9.5 million to be the bell cow there for 1 year, and then they'll figure out the running back position. Maybe they'll draft somebody with 2026 in mind. But this is Harris's backfield. There's other people that are saying, whoa. Harris goes to the Chargers. That's fine. He'll be the starting running back. But they're going to utilize a day 2 pick, whether it be round 2 or round 3, for a guy that's going to eat into Harris's volume. That's going to eat in maybe on third downs. I don't know. Maybe they're going to do the old Packer thing where Harris plays the first 2 series and then the backup plays the next full series. And then, Harris plays 2/3 of the time as opposed to being a full-time guy there. Your thoughts on how you think the Chargers are going to use him and what's the best way to attack Harris, whether you have him or whether you don't have him in dynasty leagues right at the moment?
Yeah, Harris is a tough one. He's someone who I've, haven't really been a fan of, but like you said, he's never missed a game. And I think he had maybe his most impressive season last year, nine runs of more than 20 yards, which is very impressive for a back like him. Not somebody you really think of a player that's going to break off tons of runs. So it could be an aberration. Absolutely. But you have to remember that volume is king in fantasy football. All of the efficiency metrics that Najee Harris is, a little bit lackluster in, whether you want to look at yards per carry, yards per team play, any of those kind of things. Harris is not going to look good in that, but volume drives fantasy production. And I think Harris is going to get every opportunity to do that this season. They have not brought back J.K. Dobbins. He's still kind of sitting out there in free agency. Maybe they do. But other than that, they let go Gus Edwards. So Najee Harris is the big back on the roster. I'm not really afraid. I'm not ever going to be afraid of someone like Hassan Haskins. Kamani Vidal is still, I still think he's kind of interesting from a pass catching role, a change of pace role. And the other thing you have to remember is that there are so few backfields that are just where there's just one running back getting everything. Jahmyr Gibbs, he got everything once David Montgomery went down, but David Montgomery is an integral piece of that offense, and it doesn't prevent from Jahmyr Gibbs being an elite fantasy asset, both from a production standpoint and a value standpoint. Davante Adams got everything last year, but again, because of injuries, right? There's just so few. You can go down the list. Once you get to I don't know, Kyron Williams, I guess, maybe is the last guy I would say in rankings that is a guy that you can call a true bell cow back. But they drafted Corum last year, and you have to think at some point he's going to eat a little bit of touches there. So Najee Harris is absolutely going to have competition in some form. I expect I expect every team to draft a running back this year. Every team that doesn't have, maybe even a team that has Bijan, maybe even Atlanta drafts one. I don't know. But I expect most teams to draft a running back this year because, there's honestly 15 guys that I want on my dynasty roster, and I don't have the draft capital to get them all, but the NFL teams are going to feel the same way. So while Najee Harris is going to have competition, I do think it's his. They gave $9.5 million is not a slouch contract for a running back. It's only 1 year, but that's a lot of money to pay a running back in the running back market right now. So to me, it feels like they are committed to him. So if again, it goes back to am I competing or am I not? If you're competing, you're probably fine sending like a mid-second round pick for Najee Harris. I see in the trade finder right now, there's the 206 for him. There's the 203 for him, 204, all straight up. There's a 305 for him. If you can get him for a third, I absolutely would do something like that. So I think he's going to be a good dynasty asset for this year. The problem is that, A, he's a running back, and B, he's an aged running back, and C, if he gets hurt, his value is going to zero, so you have to be okay with all of those things. So if you are a strong competitor, go out and get him. If you're not, I think the safest thing to do would probably wait till, if you don't have him on your team and you'd like to acquire him, the safest thing to do is to go ahead and wait until after the NFL draft to truly see who the competition will be from a rookie standpoint. Because I don't think the price is going to increase that much. If for some reason the Chargers do not draft a running back, all of a sudden it's not going to be Najee Harris for a first round pick, right? I just don't think that's going to happen based on his value profile. So, I think the safe play is probably to wait till after the NFL draft with a player like him.
Yeah, wait, and then early second round, you're probably out on that. You'd rather have the early second round pick, even if you're competing. Mid-second round, it gets a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, I think so. Once you get past I don't know, the top 10 running backs or so, I think that he's going to come into play.
I said at the top of the show, I should have ordered this differently. I think the most compelling, and this is my thoughts initially when I saw this signing, I'm like, God, this is the biggest one that's shaking up both redraft and dynasty right now.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of people talk about Davante Adams since then. When they talk about the big move that was made in free agency, it was Davante Adams going to the Rams as he signs a 2-year deal. He goes back out to the West Coast. This is seemingly what was reported that he wanted. He wanted to go back to the West Coast after being in New York for a couple of months or whatever it was. 85 catches, 1,000 yards, and 8 touchdowns last year between the Raiders and then when he went back to catch passes from Aaron Rodgers. That was the combined. That was his 5th year in a row of having 1,000+ receiving yards. However, for the first time in his career, we think he is going to be the number 2 receiver on his team. He was, since he reached his peak, once he achieved alpha status in Green Bay, he was always the number 1 receiver in Green Bay. Then he was the number 1 receiver in Las Vegas. Then he was the number 1 receiver essentially over Garrett Wilson in New York. Puka Nacua is going to be the top. That's the way I'm reading it, that Nacua is still going to be the number 1 guy in Los Angeles. Interesting conundrum. Does it simply come down to, Matt, that if you are competing and you need wide receiver points, you open up the coffer, you open up the wallet, you pay the draft capital or whatever it takes to get Davante Adams on your team? Or is it more nuanced than that? Understanding his age, understanding his role on the Rams, that this is not a slam dunk, that he's going to come out, as a top 20 receiver this year. I think this is very interesting, him going to the Rams. Quite frankly, haven't made up my mind on how I feel about it for Dynasty yet.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's exciting for the Rams because they've really lacked a true X receiver, and now they have one. Between Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, they both can play outside, but I think they are more natural in the slot. They're just different kind of receivers than Davante Adams is. I think Adams is going to be especially effective in the red zone, is going to have lots of touchdown equity. But I think I agree with you that Puka is probably the quote unquote wide receiver 1, but honestly, both of these guys I think are going to thrive. We know that Matthew Stafford is kind of the kingmaker at wide receiver. He turns players like Tutu Atwell and Jordan Whittington and a number of other players into just usable fantasy assets. And when you have elite talents like Davante Adams and Puka Nacua, the sky is the limit, so to speak, right? So I'm excited about this one. Again, you're riding a fine line on value with somebody like Davante Adams this year, because if he has a bad year, again, his value is going to zero. So I'm excited about it. I think he's worth having on your team. But again, if you are not competing this year, you need to get him off your roster while people are excited about this news.
Derek Greer posted, as long as we're talking about the Rams, Derek Greer, a longtime FFPC player, a guy who's been on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour before, said that he heard that Kupp is demanding a lot of cash, probably a lot of guaranteed cash, in order to be signed by any team. We heard yesterday, I heard from plenty of people, in the industry. The Rappaports and the Schefters of the world saying that they wouldn't be surprised if Kupp was signed by another team last night. That didn't happen, and he's still unsigned. He wants to stay on the West Coast. This is Mike Jarder. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right, of the Boston Sports Journal. And listen, New England would love to have Cooper Kupp. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
The thing is with Kupp, what we saw at the end of last season, limited sample size. I know he's getting up there. He flashed a little bit last year, and then just for whatever reason, just could not get anything going with Stafford and in favor of Nakua, which is where Stafford was throwing the football. So I guess the first question I have to ask you here on this, Matt, is Kupp dust? Like, is he fool's gold? Is he a guy that is more name than game at this point? But if he does land in with a team like New England, where he would probably be the de facto number one receiver, do we need to be paying attention to this for Dynasty? I don't have Kupp on a whole lot of Dynasty teams. I'm kind of in a wait and see mode right now. I have not been shopping him. I'm not trying to get rid of him at this point. I feel like wherever he signs, rightly or wrongly, there's going to be a boon in the Dynasty industry saying that, hey, this is where Kupp can thrive. This is how he wins. This is how he helps my Dynasty team. And you can use that rising swell of Cooper Kupp stock when he signs with his new team to your advantage, whether you think he's going to pan out or like I feel like I don't think he's going to pan out. And then that's the time to move him. I am holding on Kupp, and I'm definitely not making any moves to acquire him at this moment in time.
Yeah, he's, we're only, 3, maybe 4 seasons removed from maybe the best wide receiver season in NFL
Offensive
history,
player
right?
of the year.
So,
it was insane.
Yeah,
it was absolutely insane.
The triple crown, most yards, receptions, and touchdowns. Like he's a great player. But like you said, at the end of last season, he kind of just disappeared. I don't know if that's a product necessarily of the offense just wanting to do something different, or maybe he just completely washed. I feel like he never really was healthy last season. He kind of had all these nagging, and he didn't really miss a lot of time, but he just seems he was kind of always banged up. And for an aging receiver, maybe that's the case. So you're hoping for something healthy a healthier season. If he was to stay on the West Coast, and I don't know if the Raiders would be interested. I don't necessarily think the Chargers would be interested. I don't think, Seattle, I'm not sure about them. If he landed on a team like the Raiders, again, volume drives fantasy production. If he's healthy and ends up on a team like that, where he's going to be the true leader in the clubhouse at that position, I think it could absolutely work out. We've seen it. We've seen even Adam Thielen be fantasy relevant as early as soon as last season, recent as last season, right? So I'm not ruling it out completely. I will say that as soon as he signs, that's when you probably want to go trying to sell. But we do this thing in Dynasty, and I'm certainly guilty of it as well, as saying, these are the players that you sell high. These are the players you buy low, right? And in reality, we talked about it at the beginning, everybody has all of the information right now. You're not pulling the wool over anybody's eyes at this point in this game. So sometimes when we're saying, sell this player high because of the news, we're really saying maybe this is actually a buy low opportunity because the guy really wants to sell him based on this great news. And maybe I can go ahead and get him for a late 3rd round pick or something like that and add him to my competing roster. So it's really hard with these aging guys. You really have to pick a lane. Am I competing? Am I not? And assess your roster from there. He certainly could be extremely cheap points if you were to send the late 3rd for him and he puts up an 80 catch, 1,000-yard season. While that's not an incredible elite season from a wide receiver in this day and age, that's absolutely a usable stat line for your dynasty team and to acquire a player. If you're sending a late 3rd round pick for a player, if you get 1 to 2 usable games during that season from him, you've paid off that's a win. Round pick. That's a win. That's a win. Okay. Unless you hit the lottery, unless you grab Puka Nacua in the middle of the 3rd round, like we were doing, right? There are certainly those kind of lottery tickets that work out. But honestly, most of those rookies in the 3rd and 4th round of your rookie drafts are not going to pan out. And if they do, you're going to be sitting on them for probably, a year or two while they develop. It's just very rare for those guys to come out and hit from the jump. So, I'm I'm fine buying him for that kind of price. I certainly wouldn't send any second round, or probably not even an early third round pick, because players like Bashal Tutin and other players are falling to the third round in super flex format. So yeah, it's a tough one with Hall. I still want to believe with him. I think he can be productive if he's healthy and in the right position or right situation, but it's a tough one.
It's very tough, and I don't think we have a right answer at this point in the season. The right answer will probably be revealed in like October, right? Like, at that point, we'll know. But you got to make deals. You got to fix your rosters before then. Speaking of aging players, Tom on YouTube also brings this up. I put this on the rundown. What do you guys think of Evan Engram going to Denver? He is 30 years old at this point in his career. 496 career catches for just under 5,000 yards and 25 touchdowns over the course of his career 2 years ago, when he stayed healthy for basically the whole season. It was an unbelievably quiet and unbelievably awesome year. 114 catches. God, the FFPC tight end premium players, just their heads were exploding with that. 114 catches, 960 plus receiving yards, 4 touchdowns that year. And then this past year, obviously, it was bad. 47 catches, 365 yards. He got into the end zone once. Evan Engram is going to be Sean Payton's new Joker, which he, for whatever reason, craves every single year, whether he's in New Orleans, whether he's in Denver. He loves his Jokers, and he's going to get one with Evan Engram. I don't know how to let's look at this from a tight end premium standpoint. To me, on the surface, I think people look at this guy as not only a player, Matt, that was injured last year. He's been hurt over the course of his career. You know, think back to his Giants days. Like, he was hurt a lot. And I feel like you can probably use that to your advantage right now. And you may not have to break the bank to get this guy in your roster. And I think more often than not, he's going to, tight end, it's a weird position. I get it. But more often than not, I think he's going to be like a top 10 tight end on a lot of weeks this year in Denver. You think about the offense there. It's getting better. It's on the rise. You have Bo Nix, a young quarterback who looked more than capable last year. There's no quote-unquote dominant receiver in Denver right now. Cortland Sutton's probably the closest they have to it, and we heard trade rumors about him being off the roster. So there's a really big opportunity for Engram right now, and yet I feel like the dynasty landscape right now is kind of down on Engram. I'm more likely to buy on him right now, even though he's 30, even though he's coming off an injury-riddled year, and he's on a new team, new quarterback, new offense, new OC, new head coach, new everything, which that always doesn't pay off for a lot of tight ends, wide receivers over the course of the last 10 years in the NFL. But I feel like I'm more likely to buy Evan Engram than sell him right now. What do you think? How are you handling him?
I did a tight end study. It's probably been 6 or 8 years at this point. It certainly needs to be updated. But at that time, and it's not really groundbreaking or anything, but at that time, and I still think today, if you are not a top 2 option in your passing game, then you're not going to finish as a top 6 tight end. At that time, I think it was 96% of tight. I'd gone back like a decade or something, and 96% of the top 6 tight ends from a season long finish were either the number 1 or the number 2 option on their team. Mm-hmm. So right now in Denver, that's the case, right? Like you said, it's Courtland Sutton who's going to be 30 this year and has, never really fully. He's had okay seasons here and there, but if I remember right, he's never finished as like a top 15 wide receiver in fantasy ever. So you can say he's the top option if you want, but I as it stands right now, if they bring nobody else in, if they don't spend up on the wide receiver class in the draft, which is a little bit suspect anyway, then Evan Engram is going to get all kinds of volume. And we know that Sean Payton loves to use the tight end, as you mentioned, dating back to guys like Jimmy Graham, right? So the question with Evan Engram, like you mentioned, is always health. If he stays healthy and he remains a top 2 option of this team, he's going to crush. In our ADP that we collect every month over at DLF, he's currently sitting at tight end 14 outside of the top 12. And I think that's probably fairly priced. Some of these rookies may jump him once they come into the league. Right now, we just have Ty Warren and Colston Loveland ranked ahead of him amongst the rookies, but he's sitting just behind Tucker Kraft, just behind Jake Ferguson, behind Kyle Pitts, behind Dalton Kincaid, David Njoku. I mean, all of those guys, I think he has a chance to be more productive. With Tucker Kraft, you just have so many different weapons. Like, it seems like a rotation there in Green Bay. With Ferguson, I mean, he's fine, but it's kind of a boring option, right? Like, he's probably going to put up a decent score for you every week, but he's not really going to provide a massive amount of volume, I don't think. Pitts continued to disappoint. Kincaid disappointed last year after we annoyed him after his rookie season. So Evan Engram, I think, is sitting in an absolutely nice value spot right now. I feel like I keep saying that every player is worth a second. And in reality, most players that we're starting in fantasy are worth a second round pick. So again, Evan Engram, if you need a tight end and you want to send a mid-second round pick for him instead of, spending on, I think probably Warren and Colston are going to be, towards the end of the first round, if not the middle of the first round in a lot of rookie drafts, maybe the early second. So you're probably not going to be able to acquire one of those guys with a mid-second round pick. So again, if you're a contender and you need a tight end, a high volume option will be, I think, Evan Engram, barring health. That's always the issue with him.
The other thing I think is interesting too, and Matt, you probably go over these dynasty mock draft, or not dynasty mock drafts, but NFL mock drafts as much as I do, or maybe you don't, I don't know. But we have seen Colston Loveland being mocked to the Broncos over and over and over again. Now, maybe that still happens in real life. I don't know. It's not like Evan Engram is your solution here for the next half decade if you're Denver. However, for a team that was ostensibly so interested in tight end, maybe this knocks Loveland out of the first round. I don't know. Probably not. But definitely to somebody else, I would think is probably the betting favorite right now, other than Denver. I think that's another compelling thing to look at as well. The other compelling, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think now, now that they have Engram, they just have so many other needs, both at wide receiver and running back. Like right now on the depth chart, Jaleel McLaughlin is listed as their running back one. We know they moved on from Javonte Williams, Autry Estime, they drafted last year. And, he was not really super impressive in his short amount of opportunity that he got last year. So I fully expect Denver to invest in running back and wide receiver. They might draft a tight end too, because the tight end class is so good. You can go a lot deeper at the tight end position. You want to go down to Harold Fannin. He's disappointed a little bit at the combine athletically, but I'm trying to think of the other guy. I was just Elijah Arroyo is very exciting. Arroyo is very exciting. Mason Taylor is very exciting. There's a ton of great tight ends in this class, so it's possible that they draft one as well. But it seems I didn't actually see the contract numbers on Evan Engram. I don't know if they were released or not, so I'm not sure about the monetary compensation there. But it seems like he's going to be the leader in the clubhouse to get the first crack at this. Again, if he gets hurt and they draft a rookie highly, then all bets are off at that point. They might just move on from him. But at this point, Evan Engram seems locked in.
Evan Engram signed a 2-year, $23 million deal with Denver. It is $16.5 million guaranteed. So significant investment. I don't see a potential out after this season, but maybe that would happen, and I'm just not seeing it right now. That's what we're looking at with Evan Engram. And tell me this. I mean, like we mentioned all these rookie tight ends. Tell me Gunnar Helm doesn't that just sound like a Denver Bronco? And they could, but it does, but man, he talk about combine disappointments. I mean, to me, so I typically don't care that much about the combine. It does matter for certain things. And one of those things for me that matters is athleticism of tight end, whether you want to use RAS score, whether you want to use whatever athletic measure you want to use. The most predicting tight end success at the next level outside of quarterback is the most difficult position to evaluate. And the strongest correlation we have is strong athleticism. And, there's excuses made for Gunnar because I think on his 40, he tripped and hurt his ankle or something like that. Yeah. But from the numbers that we have, maybe it changes at pro day and all of that. But the numbers we have says that Gunnar is not that athletic. And if he's not that athletic, I'm probably not going to spend a rookie pick on him. Maybe Denver does. But if that happens, I mean, that's an amazing scenario for Evan Engram, I would say, at least for the next 2 years, because I don't think somebody of his caliber is going to replace him like those top guys might. So it took 64 minutes into the show for us to talk about Gunnar Helm. Whether that's good or bad, I'll let the viewers decide. What is bad is we are 64 minutes. We're over halfway done. We have not taken a break yet. And we've only, there's so much more I want to ask you about with free agency. So here's the new rundown for the show. We're going to take a quick break, catch our breath. When we come back, we're going to talk about DK Metcalf. I want to ask you about Aaron Jones. We're going to talk about Javonte Williams as well. And then Josh Palmer. I can't believe we're talking about him, but we're going to talk about him as well. And then we'll see how much of the rookie running backs and rookie receivers we get to. But I want to pick your brain on at least a few of them. And then Captain Joking, hanging out on YouTube, we're going to get to his question involving Ashton Jeanty when we lead off hour number 2. He is Matt Price, the zookeeper in the flesh tonight from Dynasty League Football. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. Hour number 2 starts next.
Andrew Cooper here of Fantasy Alarm. And if you're anything like me, football season never ends. Super Bowl's over. Who cares? We got the combine. We got the draft. We got free agency coming up here. We got a lot of speculation to do. And the best way to take advantage of that is at myffpc.com. You know, mock drafts are fun. They're fine. But if you really want to get leverage, get in one of their never too early best ball drafts or never too early super flex drafts now, where you can take advantage of all your takes. I'm in there now because I got hunches, right? I got ideas for free agency. I got ideas for the drafts. I got ideas for the 2025 NFL season, and I want to get them on paper now. And I want to do so before the NFL draft, right? Before the cat's out of the bag. That's the beauty of these contests, right? You go in and you get set up, and the drafts are already going, and they end on April 24th, right when the NFL draft starts. So you can get in there, get all your takes in, take advantage of everything before everybody finds out what happens. Use promo code ALARM at myffpc.com when you get set up. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more, and you can get in these tournaments, the never too early best ball and the never too early super flex contest, to get your shot at $10,000 or $40,000 grand prizes.
Dynasty Orphans now available at myffpc.com, the Fantasy Football Players Championship, your home for fantasy football dynasty version. Dynasty teams normally run for anywhere from $77 all the way up to $5,000. Some of those dynasty teams have already been lowered as far as their entry fees go for 2025. So take advantage of that. Pick up a dynasty fantasy football team. Play dynasty fantasy football. Play fantasy football 365 days a year. 1,800 plus leagues over the course of the last decade and a half. Not a single one has ever folded at myffpc.com. And you can utilize some of the advice you're getting tonight from one Matt Price from Dynasty League Football, at Matt Price FF, the zookeeper himself, hanging out with me, Eric Balkman, on the Fantasy Football Players Championship high stakes fantasy football show on the Better Sports Network. Well, I said we're going to lead off with Captain Joking's question. So let's get into the Ashton Jeanty portion of the show. I never like to bring up Jeanty a whole lot, Matt, because I think that most people are telling me he's the number one. He's the 101, super flex, whatever, and there's not much discussion about it. Okay, well, if there's not much discussion about it, why are we talking? But Captain Joking brings up, how do you look at him as far as how good of a prospect he was? And I'm assuming he means when these guys were coming out. Compare him to how you thought about McCaffrey when McCaffrey was drafted by the Panthers. Compare how you thought about Jeanty as opposed to how you thought about Bijan Robinson when he came out and he was drafted by the Falcons. Where does Jeanty's profile rank among those two other profiles for you?
Yeah, I think you can say he's right there. I think the most telling stat for me that I've seen is that he had the most yards from scrimmage since LaDainian Tomlinson, I believe. So he's a massive producer. For me, I don't think he's quite the level of, I would say the best prospects from the last 10 years or so that come out are Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson. Maybe you throw Jahmyr Gibbs into that. Todd Gurley, you can't forget about him, right?
Oh yeah.
For his short stint that it was his candle burned bright for a very short period of time, but he was certainly elite coming out. So yeah, I mean, he's up there with those guys. I would say he's just a notch below. The one knock you have on him is the size isn't quite the ideal for an NFL running back. You really want to see somebody that's in that 215 to 225 kind of range. He's almost there. I think he was 211 at the combine. So you'd like to see maybe 10 more pounds on him. And he's a little bit shorter at 5'8". I kind of like those shorter running backs though, thinking back to guys like Maurice Jones-Drew, Marshawn Lynch. It gives them a little bit of a chance to hide, so to speak, behind those big offensive linemen, right? And that's going to be even more accentuated at the next level. So what you said earlier about him being kind of boring to talk about it's just the way it is. It's like when Bijan Robinson came out. He's just good at everything. So like it's hard to what do you want to say? Like he's in a tier of his own, in my opinion. The NFL draft, I have heard some buzz at the combine that some GMs thought that maybe Omarion Hampton was a little bit they had them higher on their board because he's more of that ideal size at 6 foot 221, right? But to me, until I see it, I'm not going to believe that. I just think Jeanty is in a tier of his own, and he's boring to talk about because he's good at everything. The only thing you can really mention is that maybe he's a little bit undersized, but that didn't matter at Boise State. I'm not sure it's going to matter in the NFL, especially if he gets incredible draft capital. Draft capital, if you're going to do nothing else in Dynasty, if you don't want to get into the weeds with watching film and looking at all the analytics and all of that stuff, often the best way to the best predictor is NFL draft capital, as boring as it might seem. If you go into your rookie draft and just draft the players and the skill position players in the order that they were drafted, 8 times out of 10, it's going to work out for you. If you really want to get in the weeds and look at the nerdy stuff, maybe you can poke holes in Jeanty's game. But I think he's going to be the first running back off the board, and I think he's in a tier of his own and in an incredible class. So that says a lot.
It does say a lot, for sure. And I got to be honest with you, something that said a lot about how the Vikings feel about the running back situation, which I was very excited for in the NFL draft. Less excited now, Matt. Aaron Jones has, after signing a 1-year deal with the Vikings last year, has re-signed with the Vikings 2 years and $20 million is what he is getting. 1,100 plus rushing yards last year. He got in the end zone 5 times. He caught 50 plus passes last year for over 400 yards and an additional 2 touchdowns. Now, $13 million in guaranteed money, which to me is a lot of money for a dude who's on the wrong side of 30. And maybe the Vikings can thank the Packers for never utilizing Jones the way that the Vikings did last year. He was healthy for all 17 games, and he played a lot. He played a ton last year. Your thoughts on, and maybe again, this might be just coming back to, hey, if you're competing, you trade for him. If you're not competing, get out on the Aaron Jones business right now. I was really surprised to see this deal from Minnesota. I thought Jones would have to settle for another 1-year deal. Not so. And not only does he go back to the same team that had him, he goes back to a pretty good situation. We'll see what they do at quarterback. I don't think Aaron Rodgers goes to Minnesota, but there's a non-zero chance of anything. You still have a first-round pick. You still have a top 10 pick that's ready to take over at quarterback there. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, you had Aaron Jones to that mix. Minnesota did some work in free agency, improving that offensive line. On the surface, this seems like a good deal for fantasy owners who want to be in the Aaron Jones business in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, he by far blew away his season, his career touch numbers last year. 255 carries, 62 receptions. This is not necessarily how you want to use Aaron Jones. I mean, it worked out last year again, because I think they just really didn't have much. I was actually kind of on the Ty Chandler chain in last offseason. Like, I just thought he looked really impressive at the end of the 2023 season and in the preseason last year. But it just never came to fruition. Or Aaron Jones was just so reliable from a ball security standpoint. He's one of those players that we say has a nose for the end zone, even though he doesn't necessarily have the size of somebody you think is a short yardage or goal line back. He just has a way of finding the end zone both on the ground and through the air. I really do feel like, I mean, they even mentioned this, I think, last season, that they want him to be more like a 60% player, right? Not 100% player, not a 90% snap kind of guy. And I think that's how you prolong his career. You bring him in optimal situations where you know he's going to succeed, and you really need a reliable back there. But again, this is a team that is absolutely going to draft a running back, right? They've signaled that. I think they have their quarterback in place. They have their 2 wide receivers in place. They made improvements along the offensive line. TJ Hawkinson is healthy. The only real hole is at that running back spot. And it's not really a hole because you're Aaron Jones. But if he was to break down, you're looking at Ty Chandler and someone named Xavier Scott, who I actually have never heard of. And I could tell you almost every player on every NFL team, and I haven't heard that name. They've got CJ Ham at fullback. There's just really nothing there behind Aaron Jones. And if they truly want him to be a 60% player, they have to bring somebody in, and this is the running back class to do it. So from a dynasty perspective, I think if he's on your roster, you kind of hold. And if you're a competing team, we keep going back. Everything, it kind of stinks that everything is a depends statement, right? But in dynasty, it really is. It depends. Tell me don't ask me a question without telling me what your roster condition is, where you think you're going to finish in the league, where you rank amongst teams at this particular moment, and your scoring settings. If you don't tell me those things, it's hard for me to give you a really good answer or advice. And with Aaron Jones, if you are a strong contender, I would hold him because, again, he's a player you're not going to get value for. I don't think you could even really get an earlier mid-second round pick. I think you're probably looking at a late second at best for somebody like him, and the production that he could provide you on a competing team is probably going to outpace that late second round pick unless you just want to get out. So I'm holding on Aaron Jones. I'm certainly not buying unless the price is just insane, like a late third or something like that. I might go ahead and add him as a depth piece on a competing team, but otherwise he's a hold. He's probably a player that's going to just kind of ride off into the sunset on my roster unless I can get decent value from him, which I'm just not sure you can at this point.
I want to follow that up with 2 dynasty philosophy questions. Question number 1, how does this feel to you? I know, me personally, which of my dynasty rosters I know I can't compete in 2025. Yeah. Like, it's just obvious. Like, I know maybe they got too old, they got hit by injuries, whatever. Like, I know which ones I can't compete. But for the majority of my teams, and I'm not bragging here, but for the majority of my teams, I think that most of them have a fighting chance. So unless it's a complete train wreck, I think I don't want to say I'm going to go for it, but I think 75%, 80% of my teams, maybe even higher. I don't know. I feel like they can compete this year. And I feel like the lazy analysis, or a lot of people would think okay, if I play dynasty fantasy football, chances are 50% of my teams can compete. 50% of my teams can't compete. I don't think that's always the proper ratio, because I think that the teams that can compete just in any random dynasty league, it's more like 75%. It's more like 80% are competing. It's not like a half and half. It's like 3/4 and 1/4. Is that kind of your philosophy and how you handle that?
I just think it's a team by team basis. Like, there's just things you have to look at. You have to look at where your roster is at in terms of age. You have to look at how your roster compares to other teams in the league. And if you think that you're a playoff team, even if it's a fringe, again, it depends on how you like to play dynasty. You have to figure that out for yourself. Are you somebody that always wants to compete, or are you somebody that wants to sit back and just build a massive, an incredible roster that is filled with potential and maybe eventually pays off and becomes a team that you just don't want to play against? I like to build kind of build teams that makes it not fun for other people to play me in a given week, right? So no, it's definitely not. I would say about 80% of my teams are competing. I think last year, going into last season, I think I had I've pared down my leagues now from a ridiculous number I don't even want to mention to about a dozen now. And I think 10 of my 12 teams last year I thought were competing. And we see every year teams that make it into the playoffs as the 6th seed, somehow they win the title. I have a team last year that had an undefeated team last year that had the first round bye, lost in the second round to the 5th seed or 6th seed or whatever it is. So we see all the time that once you get into the playoffs, Lady Luck kind of takes over a little bit. The real skill in fantasy football and in Dynasty is, can you put together a string of years where you are making the playoffs and are competitive? Once you get to the playoffs, luck takes over a lot more. Anybody can beat any other team in a kind of a one-off situation, which makes it really difficult that's why it's difficult to win championships, right? But if you can consistently be competitive, then you go for it. That's the kind of player I am. Again, I don't want to be in the middle. I want to be an elite team, or I want to be a crappy team. And you really have to gauge your individual lean. If you are that middle team and maybe you are like a running back away, and if you can make a deal to acquire that missing piece, now maybe you've jumped up to the third best team in the league. At that point, now you're in competing mode. If you can't get any of those deals done by the time your trade deadline hits, or by the time the playoffs hit, then maybe you go the other direction. I really like to make a decision with my team by like week 7, week 8. Am I competing or am I not? If I'm not, now I have the other half of the season to go out shopping and try to acquire as much youth and draft picks that I can, and get rid of all of the kind of chuff for my team, right? So I don't know. I think I went off on a tangent there, but
no, but your question. What you made me think of, Matt, was like this one Dynasty League I've been in for like 15 years. I've been the highest scoring team in this league. I don't know how many times. I've been the number 1 seed. I don't know how many times. Never won. For the longest time, I'd be eliminated in the playoffs the first week, or like the second week, the semifinals, or whatever. This year, I kind of like half limp in. I had to start Ray McLeod in the championship because of CeeDee Lamb and some other stuff that didn't go my way. And I was like the 5 seed, and I won it for the first time. But that's what happens. Like, you just, we don't like to say luck, but luck does play a part in it. And sometimes it's just more important to get to the playoffs and see what happens, rather than build this juggernaut that simply can't lose. That's really tough to do. You know what's easier to do? Building a playoff team that gets hot. So there you go. Off topic, says Rich on YouTube. I still want Ray Davis or Blake Corum next year, hoping they fall. Now, what's interesting about Corum and Davis here is they were part of I don't want to say lackluster, but let's say unspectacular. Just say
it was bad. It was a bad. Okay. It may be the worst class we've seen in a decade of running backs.
I was going to say unspectacular. You say bad. Okay, we'll say it was a bad class. So my concern is, and this is coming from a guy in me who invested in Blake Corum in probably more Dynasty leagues than I should have in rookie drafts last year. I'm hoping that Corum has an opportunity this year. I don't know if that opportunity is going to come. I'm nervous about Davis. I'm nervous about Corum, not only because of how talented they are compared to this upcoming class of running backs, but knowing what the Rams could do and knowing what the Bills could do. Like, it's fine if you want to be high on them. I think it's really risky to be high on these guys right now. It's a whole, I feel like this is like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. Like the end of the world is coming. Maybe not a zombie apocalypse, maybe a nuclear winter, where everybody's huddled in their basements, in their bomb-proof shelters, a mile below the ground. What's the show Paradise that's going on right now? I think that's on Netflix or Hulu or whatever it is, where it's like the outside world is dead, and you're just waiting and hoping. You're waiting for the missiles of Amorian Hampton and Quinshawn Judkins and Travion Henderson to like hit, and hopefully they miss you, and then you can come back out to the surface and breathe oxygen of Ray Davis and Blake Corum. I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but I feel like that's the opportunity that you should have right now. You shouldn't be investing in this wide landscape, all this territory that's above ground, knowing that missiles are about to hit it. I don't want to invest into the territory of Ray Davis. I don't want to invest into the province of Blake Corum right now, knowing it could be decimated, come the end of next month. So, I mean, it's fine to like those guys, but investing in them, that's a whole different story that I'm not want to be a part of.
Yeah, again, it's always price dependent, right? Like I love Ray Davis. He was my favorite running back in the class last year. I really did think that he was going to take 40% of the role in Buffalo of the running back rush share last year in Buffalo. It just didn't transpire. I mean, James Cook was just so good. He was a touchdown machine. I do think there's regression coming for him. But like you said, with this class coming, it's just really hard to be confident in any secondary back in any offense. The value proposition for both of these guys, for them to hit their ultimate ceiling, is A, the starter has to go down, which we never want to hope for, and B, they have to dodge this running back class that's coming in. It's just very, very risky to invest in those guys. He's saying he's hoping they fall. Maybe he's talking about from a more of a redraft perspective. I can totally see throwing a late round dart and Ray Davis, hoping that he either increases his role or again, something happens to the backs in front of them. But yeah, I would not be confident in that investment at all.
Derek Gree pipes in on YouTube right now. Not one rookie running back in 2024 class paid off, but Tyrone Tracy. Am I right? Well, I'm going to tell you this right now, Derek. Right now, yeah, you're right. But we have an NFL draft that here's maybe this is the better analogy. You know that thing you go to these carnivals or whatever, and they have the knife thrower, right? And he's throwing all those axes and knives at the woman who's on the spinning board or whatever, and he's going to avoid hitting her. Like, I feel like that's how a lot of dynasty owners are going to be watching the NFL draft, like with running backs or whatever, hoping that those knives don't hit my Tyrone Tracy. They don't hit my Blake Corum. They don't hit my Trey Benson or anything like that. I feel like that's what's going to happen. Rich, by the way, is referring to redraft as well. Redraft is different. I always bring up Joe Del Zanero, a longtime FFPC player, and he wasn't a dynasty guy, but I think it applies here. There's no such thing as a bad draft pick after round 10. So if you want to take a shot on Ray Davis or Blake Corum, go with God. I'm fine with that. Now, a guy who is not going after round 10, DK Metcalf. I can't remember if we talked about this on the show last week. The Seahawks traded him to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They get a second round pick, and there's like a 6th or 7th round pick swap involved between the Seahawks and Steelers. But then the Steelers turn around and give Metcalf a 5-year, $150 million contract. Now, not the first thing, but one of the things I thought of, I was like, okay, Metcalf and Pickens, two very, and I mean this in a kind way, egocentric wide receivers that wear the same number. So already you're having this massive, like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Is Metcalf going to wear the same number as Pickens? Well, we already found out he's going to wear number 4. So all fine and good there. But when you think about the dynasty value, it's really, really difficult at this point right now, Matt, because the Seahawks gave up a 2nd-round pick for him. They're giving him, and again, there's some funny money in the 5-year, $150 million contract, but AAV of $30 million, whatever. Who's throwing him the football? I'm sure the Steelers would hope to have an answer on Aaron Rodgers right now. Russell Wilson, I don't think comes back. They just signed Mason Rudolph today. I can't believe that's the fallback plan of having Pickens and Metcalf and giving all this money to Metcalf and have Mason Rudolph throwing it to him week 1. But what happens if Rodgers doesn't pick Pittsburgh? I mean, this could go bad, and it could go bad real fast. How do you feel about Metcalf's dynasty value at the moment, knowing that we don't know who's throwing him the football in 2025 and beyond?
I'm afraid. We've been talking about players were 2nd-round picks. If you can get a 1st-round pick for DK Metcalf, I'm out. And this is coming from that who love DK Metcalf. I mean, I can't remember if it was the end of his rookie season or early in his 2nd season. I actually had him as the wide receiver in my rankings, the wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. So I love DK Metcalf, but this is not a fit. I mean, the Steelers have royally screwed up the quarterback position. They should have, when Ben Roethlisberger 2nd or last season, they should have addressed it then. They should have had the next guy on the roster. They didn't. They went and spent a 1st-round pick on Kenny Pickett. We know how that went. And then they tried to piece everything together, and we know how that went too, right? So even if Aaron Rodgers does pick them, are we that excited about him going there and with these weapons? That's not really his game anymore. Sure, he's gonna take advantage of the offsides, the free play, and chuck it deep, and one of these guys might catch it for a long touchdown. Absolutely, but to count on him to provide consistent production for both of these receivers, which honestly I think they're going to cannibalize each other a little bit. Yeah. These are both players that win down. Now they win downfield in different ways, but these are both players that win downfield. So you're going to get spike week games, absolutely, but it is going to be inconsistent. It's going to be maddening. You're going to play him 1 week and he's going to have 2 catches for 17 yards, and then the next week you're not going to play him and he's going to have 4 catches for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, right? Like, it's just going to be so maddening to me. So I think I want to get out on DK right now just because of all of the uncertainty around what's going on there. And like you said, both of these guys have a little bit of head case is a little bit strong maybe, but these guys are both very opinionated players. It comes out on the field. We already know Pickens was just, he was so angry early last season when Fields was the quarterback, right? We've seen that stuff come out from him. I think the ideal situation here for Metcalf, the only winning situation you have for Metcalf, is for some reason they decide to move on from George Pickens, and I think that could happen in a trade situation if they decide they want DK to be the alpha. But as it stands right now, I'm afraid for DK Metcalf's value, and I think it will be worth less. He'll be worth less from a dynasty standpoint now, or excuse me, next year than he is right now.
Let's do this. Let's do a quick would you rather based on the Dynasty League Football wide receiver dynasty rankings right now. DynastyLeagueFootball.com is where to go for this. Would you rather have, Matt? And again, this is in a vacuum for dynasty. You're competing, you're not competing, doesn't matter. Would you rather have DK Metcalf or George Pickens, dynasty-wise?
I need to pull up my rankings because I'm going to say something and it's going to be the opposite of that I do right now. I'll do it right now.
So you bring up your rankings here, but I think this is very compelling when it comes to Metcalf, because Metcalf is not young. He is not old. He is going from Seattle.
He's in his prime,
Pittsburgh.
honestly.
He's in his prime, right? Okay, so this is really fun because a lot of these guys that we'll be talking about, well, maybe not a lot of it, but some of them will be past their prime. Some of them will be not yet to their prime. So the new Steelers teammates, they're very close on DynastyLeagueFootball.com right now. Pickens, wide receiver 21, Metcalf, wide receiver 23. Who would you rather have?
In my rankings, and I think I need to do some updates, I'm probably going to move Metcalf down a little bit, but right now I have Metcalf at wide receiver 19 and Pickens at wide receiver 34. So I have quite a gap there.
Okay.
I think they are probably closer than that. I think they're probably both in the late 20s if I had to make an adjustment on the fly. But I think I would prefer Metcalf, mostly because, they gave him the money, right? They gave Metcalf George Pickens' bag. Pickens is sitting at home, be like, that's my money, man. They're not. It's very, and I know Cincinnati is going to try very hard to sign both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins to long-term deals, but it's very difficult to pay 2 wide receivers $100 million each in today's NFL unless you have that quarterback on his rookie contract, right? And they're not. They're going to have a cheap quarterback contract, whatever they decide to do. But I just don't think they're going to pay both of these guys. So for job security standpoint, and just because of the unknown of George Pickens and where he might end up, I think I would go with Metcalf right now. And even saying that, I'm not super confident in that decision.
Based on that same argument of not knowing what's going to happen to the other guy in next year or forthcoming years, would you rather have Metcalf or would you rather have Brandon Ayuk in San Francisco?
I'd rather have Ayuk.
Ayuk, yeah. Okay.
Now that Debo has moved on, I just think the situation, yeah.
What about Xavier Worthy in Kansas City or Metcalf? Does the youth give you say or make you say I want Worthy over Metcalf?
Yeah, you're a lot of the on DLF Dynasty podcast, we talk a lot about buying back years. Uh-huh. If I can move Metcalf and get Worthy in even a mid to late second, I'm probably making that deal. I go ahead and give me Worthy. He came on at the end of last year, and then the playoffs, Rashee Rice, we hope he comes back and everything's going to be fine with the legal stuff off the field and with the injury situation. I think it's going to work out fine. They brought back Hollywood, of course, on a 1-year deal, but I think Worthy really showed the ceiling that he has. So I'm going to take the youth there and go ahead and buy back years. And, maybe I can get Metcalf next year for cheaper if things did work out.
Matt, if somebody comes to you and wants your DK Metcalf and they're offering their DJ Moore, what would you say to him?
I'm probably going to take DJ Moore. Yeah. Because again, it's stability. The Bears have been making upgrades to that offensive line all off season. We have Ben Johnson there, who's all world play caller the last couple of years in Detroit. So you have to put a little bit of faith in Caleb Williams turning it around, but you hope that the offensive line's improvements will reduce that leading sack rate that he had last season. So yeah, I'll take DJ Moore on that one too.
Last one before we move on. Would you rather have DK Metcalf or Terry McLaurin?
I'm gonna go with the I'm gonna take the years and take Metcalf there. That one's pretty. I would say it's pretty close, but yeah, I typically don't want to invest in 30-year-old receivers. So,
the Jets, I don't know how I move on from that. The Jets, Terry McLaurin, Ohio State receiver. The Jets have Garrett Wilson. Let's talk about the Jets, because they have a former Ohio State quarterback now, Justin Fields, as their signal caller, which is really, really fun for redraft for sure, because of his legs. I think I said this, I was on Sirius XM earlier today, and I said, I think this guy is a borderline top 12 receiver in redraft. Dynasty gets a little foggier because you don't really know what's going to happen the first year of what's his name? Tanner Engstrand, I want to say, who came over from Detroit, who's the new OC for New York, was a passing game coordinator with Ben Johnson in the Lions last year. Aaron Glenn, first year as a head coach. No Davante Adams. It's going to be Garrett Wilson. Not a lot of perimeter weapons besides Wilson. I mean, you have Breece Hall in the backfield. But Fields is very interesting to me, given that he can still not be very good throwing the ball, Matt. But as long as he's running, he's got fantasy value. How much dynasty value does he have right now in New York, knowing that there are still a lot of moving pieces with the Jets?
Yeah, I think he's definitely attractive in a super flex format. I would say having that kind of rushing upside as your quarterback too in a super flex league is kind of invaluable, especially, Fields was on pace, I think, for 14 rushing touchdowns last season. And of course, touchdowns is kind of not the stickiest stat year to year. We can go up and down. We see regression all the time in that regard. But anytime you have a rushing quarterback, you have a chance to have a top 5 quarterback in any given week. I have even last season, I think he finished as the quarterback 2. He only had 6 starts, but I think he finished as a top 10 quarterback 2 or 3 times in that time period. So all it takes is, you have to think about it from this standpoint. If a quarterback rushes for 60 yards, that's worth a touchdown. Yeah. Right. So you get 60 yards rushing and you don't get that extra pass. You don't get that third passing touchdown or whatever. It's cool because you got the 60 rushing yards. The rushing yards bring up the floor of a player, and players like this, it's the passing when it comes along that provides the ceiling. So, Justin Fields has certainly had his struggles as a passer, but he's a deep ball passer. He had a lot of success with that with Ohio State at 60 something touchdowns over his time as a starter there. He did play 2, although one of them was a COVID shortened season. And it was his freshman and sophomore year for Garrett Wilson. So, but he does have some kind of rapport with him there. So I'm kind of excited about Justin Fields. I'm always on the side of the rushing quarterback. I said last offseason when he was cut that I can't remember if he was cut or traded, but whatever it was, I said he's going to be a starter in the league again. At some point, somebody's going to give him the chance to do it. And here we are. I mean, he was the starter last season. I think Russell Wilson certainly fit the Steelers offense better once he took over, but Fields is going to be we're talking about the fantasy football game. We're not talking about real NFL here. I think Fields has job security at least through this year. Maybe I haven't looked specifically at the contract to see if there's an out after this season, but for this season, he seems locked in. I don't think they're going to make any significant moves to prevent that. So he's somebody who could absolutely finish as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. And if everything hits right, it's hard to trust the Jets organization in general, of course. But if everything hits right, I think he's someone with his rushing acumen is going to provide top 10 production over the course of the season, and probably quarterback one or 3 overall in a given week, right? So
yeah, and the thing with that I read about Fields was that he didn't want to re-up in Pittsburgh unless they were going to tell him that he was their quarterback 1. And so he ends up going to New York, where I would think that they have told him, you are going to be our quarterback 1. It does not look like there's an out after 2025, at least if Spot Rack is any kind of guide here. It looks like 2026 they can void. Well, it's a 2-year deal, so it doesn't matter. He'll be unrestricted free agent after that. So Fields is very interesting for Dynasty. I think he's much more interesting for redraft.
Agree.
But I think you can really.
He's cheap,
make some headway in Dynasty with Fields right now, especially in the Superflex.
Yeah, and even I was going to say even in a one quarterback league, because look, in one quarterback leagues, you just need a difference maker at that position. And it's hard to find difference makers if you aren't rushing, and Fields rushes. So like you have those outlier seasons every year. There's one or two, like kind of a more, pocket is kind of an extreme term, but players like Joe Burrow last year that has an incredibly efficient season, throws for 4,500, close to 5,000 yards and 40 plus touchdowns. Those are the kind of seasons you need from pure pocket passers to reach those top five quarterback at the end of the year scoring. It's just so incredibly difficult. They have to have outlier seasons, incredibly efficient, high touchdown numbers. Whereas a rushing quarterback doesn't have to do that. If they can run for 5, 6, 7, 800 yards in a season and have, at league average kind of passing numbers, you can have a top 5 quarterback based on that. So it's just so much easier for those guys to get there.
A few things. I'm going to go rapid fire on these last 3 things. Cedric Tillman is what Bill Hollywood wants us to talk about. What do you think of him in 2025? He had a stretch there where he was really good before he got hurt. Any take on him? Well, here's the thing, and this is my take on him. Once they made the trade for Jerry Jeudy and he actually absolutely went ham, my Cedric Tillman excitedness is I don't want to say non-existent, but it's definitely a lot lower right now. If you can move off him. I just don't know what you're going to get right now. But to me, it's all about Jerry Jeudy in Cleveland.
Well, and again, it's another place where we have no idea what's happening at quarterback. I don't think Watson is going to be playing games for the Browns or any other NFL team ever again. They just traded for Kenny Pickett in a deal that, while they didn't give up a ton, in my opinion, they got fleeced on. Like, why? In what world do you have to send a draft pick along with DTR to trade for Kenny Pickett, right? I still like Kevin Stefanski as a play caller and as a coach, so maybe it could work out. But they have it was the number 2 pick, I think. If for some reason Cam Ward was to fall from there, they're going to pull the trigger on that, and maybe then we have something. But really, it's just not a very exciting outcome, I think, for Cedric Tillman. So I would not be investing.
No, I wouldn't be either. Another guy I'm not really investing in, despite him being the starting running back in Dallas right now. Javonte Williams moves from the Mile High City to Big D, 1 year, $3 million. I think if you can find the right owner in your league that's willing to take Javonte Williams on, now is the time to get out, because at the end of April, Dallas is going to have a brand new spanking running back there, and it's not going to be Javonte Williams. He is clearly at best the 1B. I have no hope for him having any kind of fantasy success. Even if the guy in front of him goes down, I don't know how good that window. You think about Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. When Walker, if he's out, Charbonnet is going to do numbers.
Yeah.
I have no confidence in Javonte Williams doing numbers if the guy in front of him goes down. I don't see much here.
Well, and we saw, I think last year, Rico Dowdle was better than Javonte Williams, right? So that kind of tells you all you really need to know. They kicked Rico Dowdle out. They brought in more inferior back. He's just such a sad story, man. When he came out of school from North Carolina, he was just a tackle breaking machine. He was a really exciting prospect. Some people had him as the top running back in that class, even, and just that horrific knee injury that hit him just robbed him of his ability to break tackles. So I actually, we talked about being wrong most of the time. Last season I actually made a move on a contending team where it's a points per carry league. I moved Chris Godwin for Javonte Williams and hoping the resurgence of last year. That did not work out. It worked out because straight up. It's a running back heavy format, but still, obviously that was a terrible move. So.
Matt, you took your shot. That's all you can do.
That's all you can do.
Yeah. Last thing I want to bring up before we take our final break, Josh Palmer, 3 years, $46 million from Buffalo, of all places. Now, the leading receiver there last year was Khalil Shakir, who they also extended and gave decent money to. I don't think it's all that unlike what they gave Josh Palmer. Can we glean anything about the Bills passing game based on what the Bills have done with Shakir's contract and now bringing Josh Palmer into the fold as well?
No, I really don't think so. It just feels like it's going to be rotation again. I was not the biggest Keon Coleman fan, but he's clearly the guy that they want to be the alpha, right? But it just didn't really work out that way. It became just a maddening rotation. Secure was really the only consistent guy out of the slot, and obviously they love him. So I don't really think Josh Palmer is a fine player, and fine players can be productive NFL players, but for fantasy purposes, I just don't think he's going to be provide enough week-to-week ceiling for him to be worth it on our dynasty teams.
Hashtag better in best ball. That's what we can say from a redraft standpoint. Well, listen, this was a really not even all encompassing. I didn't even get to all the players I wanted to ask you about, Matt, because we got in deep conversations, which is good. But I do want to focus the remaining 16 minutes plus of this show on rookies here. So let's talk about some rookie running backs. Let's talk about rookie receivers. I am going to go check on my kids, so I'm going to need about 90 seconds here. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Matt Price from Dynasty League Football weighs in on Ted McMillan, weighs in on Omari and Hampton, and much more. You're watching the FFPC High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.
Andrew Cooper here of Fantasy Alarm, and if you're anything like me, football season never ends. Super Bowl's over. Who cares? We got the combine. We got the draft. We got free agency coming up here. We got a lot of speculation to do. And the best way to take advantage of that is at myffpc.com. Mock drafts are fun. They're fine. But if you really want to get leverage, get in one of their never too early best ball drafts or never too early super flex drafts now, where you can take advantage of all your takes. I'm in there now because I got hunches, right? I got ideas for free agency. I got ideas for the drafts. I got ideas for the 2025 NFL season, and I want to get them on paper now. And I want to do so before the NFL draft, right? Before the cat's out of the bag. That's the beauty of these contests, right? You go in and you get set up, and the drafts are already going, and they end on April 24th, right when the NFL draft starts. So you can get in there, get all your takes in, take advantage of everything before everybody finds out what happens. Use promo code ALARM at myffpc.com when you get set up. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more, and you can get in these tournaments, the never too early best ball and the never too early super flex contest, to get your shot at $10,000 or $40,000 grand prizes.
Thank you to the award-winning Andrew Cooper from Fantasy Alarm popping on to talk a little bit about the Never Too Early tournament. You too can play in the Never Too Early tournament over at myffpc.com, myffpc.com. $40,000 grand prize in the Never Too Early tournament, $10,000 grand prize in the Superflex Never Too Early tournament. Those drafts have already been running since January. They're going to go all the way up to April 24th when we cut off registration because that is the day of the NFL draft. And who better to talk about some of the prospects that are going to be going in that first round that evening than Matt Price from dynastyleaguefootball.com. Matt Price joining me tonight. Let's talk about receivers. We went running back heavy last week, so I want to focus on the wide receivers right now. Are you in the Ted McMillan camp? I've heard some people say, hey, Luther Burden is still my guy. You have Emeka Egbuka, who I think has a higher floor maybe than Burden, maybe than McMillan, but maybe not as high of a ceiling. Those to me are like the top three. How are you looking at the top end of this rookie receiver class right now, Matt?
I'm probably going to let draft capital decide. Honestly, I don't really think there's a consensus wide receiver one in this class. Right now I have Bird in there, but I don't feel super strongly about it. Tech McMillan is a fun player. You like that. You love the size. Obviously it's 6'4", 6'4", almost 220. He has multiple two direct seasons of 1,300 plus yards receiving. You like to see players have multiple years of elite production in college to really feel good about him, and Ted has that. He's just not really my kind of receiver. I really value players that can create separation on their own, primarily through their routes, and his routes are solid, but he's one of those players that we have a lot of wide receivers in this class, a lot of bigger wide receivers in this class, which is different than previous years, right? Like last year was pretty much all small guys. There was a very, very rare player that had any amount of size last season. This season, we have a ton of these guys where the defender just kind of always seems to be in their back pocket. And those guys, they can work out, but sometimes, but then other times you get players like N'Keal Harry or going back Laquan Treadwell, players like this that they just struggle to create separation. They thrive in contested catch situations. And Ted McMillan is one of those guys. So I definitely think he can work out. He's comped to Drake London a lot. I think Drake London was a little bit more polished coming out than he is, but from a comp perspective, you can see that. So and we really like Drake London still. So you can see it definitely working out. But right now, I'm not sure I'm calling him the wide receiver one in the class. He's not my wide receiver one. He's actually my wide receiver 3. And I guess I think you would probably call him my wide receiver 4, depending on what happens with Travis Hunter. He's a whole nother ball of wax that is a huge discussion of what he's going to do. Right. But right now I prefer the floor of somebody like Ibuka, and I prefer the ceiling of somebody like Burden, and both of those players certainly have warts too. I'm just a little bit worried about some of the things with McMillan. But if he goes top 10 overall, then, all bets are off. He's going to be the wide receiver 1 in the class.
If you see the hashtag not my wide receiver 1 on X, referring to Ted McMillan, it's probably from @MattPriceFF on X for sure. You did a deep dive into Trey Harris out of Ole Miss for DynastyLeagueFootball.com. I wanted to, because he has an interesting story, as far as what he was in high school, college, so on and so forth. What did you learn about Trey Harris that maybe changed or reinforced the way you felt about him from a dynasty standpoint?
I'm kind of in the middle, I think, amongst the consensus on Harris. There's definitely things that I like about him. He's versatile enough to play all 3 positions. Again, he has size like a lot of receivers in this class. He's going to be, I think, a physical possession receiver. He's got the size, the length. He has the body control to make those above the rim kind of catches, especially at the sideline. He's a good route runner. I wouldn't say he's an amazing route runner. He has these subtle moves that he does. In breaking routes, I think, are his strength, where he uses his size well to box out defenders underneath. Strong jump ball and fade receiver in the end zone. The problem, I think, with Harris, the reason why I'm not that excited about him is he doesn't really have any kind of elite athletic traits, right? And I think that's a little bit less important at the receiver position than other positions like tight end and running back specifically. But you'd like a guy to truly have a calling card, right? You'd like a guy you call out Ted McMillan, you say he's 6'4", he's big, he's got amazing wingspan and that kind of stuff. With Trey Harris, he's just kind of a solid physical possession receiver, and that kind of profile can absolutely work out, especially with his versatility to play all over the formation, right? But it's going to be one of those situation dependent things. Where does he land? Who's the quarterback throwing? Because I do think he's going to be one of those quarterbacks that have the ability to throw players open. If he goes to someplace like just Dallas comes to the top of my head, where Dak Prescott, I think, is a very see it, throw it quarterback. He wants his receivers to be open clearly before he's going to throw them the ball. So it's going to be draft capital landing spot decision for the specific for Trey Harris for me. I like him, but I don't love him.
Right. And a lot of the stuff when you're talking about Trey Harris, I'm thinking of Emeka Egbuka in my head, because I think this is another guy that has a really high floor, but I don't know how elite he is at anything. Can you sell me on Egbuka? Because what you're saying about Harris is kind of like what I've thought about Egbuka. Now, he's probably going to get round 1 draft capital. Harris will not. At least that's, it looks that's the way it looks right now. But Egbuka, to me, is another guy that's hey, he's probably going to have a fine career. Is he ever going to be a top 12 receiver? Is he ever going to be a top 10 receiver? I don't know. I'm not sold on that. Can you sell me on Egbuka?
I don't know if I can sell you on him being an elite, kind of an elite asset at the wide receiver position, but I can sell you on, I just think he's such a smart player. And, that's kind of a weird thing to talk about, right, with NFL players, but his football IQ is off the charts for the wide receivers. And he understands the angle of attack. He understands how he's going to be defended before the play starts, and how he can use that information to manipulate the defense based on he sees. He just seems to always be open in the right spot, especially on those short and intermediate routes that are so prevalent in today's NFL. And he attacks the optimal spot in zone coverage just consistently. He's got good speed, acceleration, and agility. I think he is a much better route runner than Trey Harris is. And one thing that I really like to see, it's kind of an esoteric thing maybe, but I really love it when you see a player, a wide receiver, have late hands on those deep balls. When you see a player that doesn't throw his hands up until the last second. He keeps that cornerback or that defender guessing on where the ball is if he's not looking back at the quarterback. Those kinds of players, are smart. If you see that when you're watching a prospect, that's a smart player. He only had 4 drops last season, so he's got reliable hands. Coaches are going to love him because he is an enthusiastic blocker in the run game. I know we don't care about that for fantasy, but that's how you get when you have those little things, whether it's playing special teams, whether it's blocking in the run game. That's how you get on the field as an NFL prospect. Maybe a little bit different for somebody in the first round. They're always going to get on the field, right? But if you have those, you do those little things, those things that make coaches happy, you're going to get on the field. From a negative standpoint, he's not going to have a lot of yak. He's not going to be an above the rim kind of player. In fact, when I was watching him, I think I've watched 8 games through him, and I think I saw maybe 1 or 2 claims when he kind of went up and made like kind of a jump ball catch. He just doesn't need to. He wins with his routes, right? Mm-hmm. He's versatile. I think he's probably his best spot is going to be slot in college. He's 80% slot, 20% out wide. He may be a little bit like his former teammate JSN, who we thought was going to be a primary slot player, and that's probably his best role, but he can win outside. My comp for Egbuka is somebody like Amari Cooper, somebody who is very savvy with his route running, somebody who has that kind of old man game, is just a savvy, smart player and knows how to get open. And if you know how to get open in the NFL, you can create separation on your own. You're going to have a job. So I like Egbuka quite a bit. He's currently my wide receiver 2 in the class. Okay,
so I feel like you didn't give me the hard sell on Egbuka, but you still get like, here's the thing. The last, and I viewers of this show are going to know this, the last 4 or 5 weeks, I've been trying to get guests to sell me on Tet McMillan. Well, based on what you were saying about McMillan, I'm like, well, Matt's not going to sell me on McMillan, which is fine because I don't know if I want to buy. But it's interesting that you bring that out about Egbuka, because I think like he could be that sneaky guy that is never going to be elite, but still could provide a lot of really good fantasy years for you when you consider how polished he is. And again, how smart he is. I mean, you're talking about his traits and how he's maybe wise beyond his years and knows how to win. He is the leading receiver in Ohio State history, probably because
I didn't know that.
He's the leading, like over Harrison, Boston, McLaurin, Glenn, all those guys. He's hot. But again, he played there. A lot of people thought he was going to be in the 2024 draft. He wasn't. And then he had the college football playoff that he marched through. So he got those bonus games there as well. But even still, I think there is something to be said about Egbuka. Now, flip side. Well, maybe not flip side. We danced around this. I do want to ask your opinion. Travis Hunter, non-IDP leagues, like your standard run-of-the-mill meat and potatoes dynasty league. What in the heck are we doing with this guy? Obviously draft capital. Draft capital won't play into it because he's going to go high. But who drafts him, I think, is going to play a role in this. Do we just kind of reserve judgment on Hunter before we find out who he's going to be playing with?
Yeah, he's so tough because he's a unicorn, right? Again, this is a game of probabilities. I think the most likely outcome, regardless of where he goes, is that he's a full-time defensive player and he'll have packages on offense that he's going to come in for, right? Like, it just doesn't seem like it could work the other way. I don't think you can play full-time wide receiver and then you come in occasionally on defense. I'm open to being convinced otherwise, but to me, the most likely outcome is that he's going to have packages at wide receiver. And how often is he going to be out there? I do think that when he is out there as a wide receiver, that he's going to be involved in the play, right? Like, why else would he be on the field? I don't think you're going to use him as a decoy. So it might not matter, but again, volume drives fantasy production. If he's not going to see, 60 snaps on offense, 50 to 65 snaps on offense, is he going to be doing enough consistently for us to feel good about putting him in his lineup? And I'm certainly not a defensive scout. I have formal training as an offensive scout. So I think as a wide receiver, it's a fine prospect, but I don't think he's necessarily elite. I don't think he's like I think he would have been like, if he was purely playing wide receiver, I think he would have been maybe wide receiver 4 or 5 in last year's class, just for example. Now, other people certainly disagree with that. I think Matt Harmon, who does incredible work with wide receivers, obviously, like he has him as one of the best prospects to come out in recent years. So, take what I say with a grain of salt here. But to me, he's just a better player on defense, which is hard to say considering he won the Biletnikoff Award for the best wide receiver in college football, right? Yeah, exactly. So I think if you're trying to figure out what to do with him in rookie drafts, I think I'm willing to pull, again, depending on landing spot situation, where he goes, if we find out more information about how they're going to use him, I think I'm willing to pull the trigger based on what we know right now, kind of in that mid to late second range. I think at that point, the risk reward kind of balances out itself. If we find out that he's going to be a full-time wide receiver, then he's a first-round pick in rookie drafts, right? But right now, there's just so much uncertainty with him that I'm not willing to spend a premium pick on him. And also, we haven't talked about the running backs really yet, but this running back class is just so good. I personally am not sure I'm going to come away with any wide receivers in the class and in this class unless they present significant value. I think I'm just always going to be able to find a running back that I like just as much. And if not more, based on what we've seen from these two positions in this class.
We're fast running out of time. I'm going to do rapid fire on this. I want one-word answers, except for this first question I ask you.
Okay, I'll try. I'm not good at these, but I'll try.
Okay, yeah. The 2017 rookie running back class: Fournette, McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Mixon, Kamara, Kareem Hunt, Deontay Foreman, James Conner, Tariq Cohen, Jamal Williams, and we'll leave it with Aaron Jones.
Yeah.
How does that year's class, 2017, compare with the 2025 version?
I think the 2025 class is just as good, if not better, at the top. And it's going to be, this is what we need for the running back. I mean, if you look at the dynasty, sorry, I know I'm getting a little bit long-winded here. But if you look
this is good.
Okay. So if you look at like the dynasty, again, if you look at the dynasty running back landscape, I mean, again, there's half a dozen guys that you feel really, really good about. Even somebody that emerged last year, like Chase Brown, if he avoids these missiles that you're talking about, awesome, full steam ahead. But if he doesn't, like, he's going to be splitting time with one of these guys, and they might be more talented than he is, right? So it's just a class that is going to change fantasy football, in my opinion, especially from a dynasty standpoint. Redraft too, but especially from a dynasty standpoint, it's an earth-shattering class.
So one-word answers now. We've never done this before on the show. This is the third year this is the third year we've done this show, and we've never done one-word answers. This is going to be so much fun. And if you want Matt to expound on this, at Matt Price FF on X, and he'll expound on it. One-word answers on this. Yes or no, can you make a case for Amari and Hampton over Ashton Jeanty?
Yes.
How many running backs will be drafted in the first round of the NFL draft this year?
2.
Which Ohio State running back do you like better, Judkins or Henderson?
Judkins. My favorite player in the class. Sorry.
Okay, that's not one word. That's okay. Exposition is fine. Does Kalen Johnson have a limited ceiling?
Yes.
I'm going to change this question. Does Cam Scadaboo hit on the next level?
Absolutely.
Oh, God, I'm going to have to hit you up on X now. Our FFPC, that's a bad question. Is Ollie Gordon a Jag? Is he just a guy?
I'm going to say yes. Not confident, but yes.
I think I'm going to wrap up with this one. Are you drinking the Bashal Tootin' Kool-Aid?
I am.
No, God bless you, Matt Price.
Can I expound on that one?
Go ahead. Feel free.
I would really like for him to be about 10 or 15 pounds heavier, and I think he has a ton of warts, whether it's trying to bounce things outside. I don't think he can catch passes outside of his frame, but when you have a player that has that level of contact balance and home run speed, it can work in the NFL. I'm not spending a first-round pick likely on him in Dynasty because I just don't think he's going to get the draft capital for that, but I'm absolutely spending a late second. I've seen him go in the early third of some mocks, so at that price level, I think there's nothing but upside.
This was awesome. At Matt Price FF for all the stuff that you wanted that we couldn't get into with running backs tonight. Hit him up there. You will hear him talk about it on the Dynasty League Football podcast, which you can get anywhere you get podcasts. And then of course, Matt Price FF on X. Matt, this was so much fun. we will have to have you back on at some point. I had a blast, and now I have so many Scattaboo and Judkins questions for you that we'll have to talk about some other time. Anything else we should know? Dynasty League Football and x.com/MattPriceFF. That's the way to follow you.
Yes, sir. And thank you so much for having me on. It's been a blast, Eric. I appreciate the invite, and I would always be happy to come back. Appreciate you having me on, man.
You're the man. We will continue to listen to you. Dynasty League Football Podcast, dynastyleaguefootball.com. We'll be back at 7 o'clock next Thursday. Sign up for the FFPC Never Too Early and Superflex Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament Drafts over at myffpc.com. The big gorilla going off there as well. Myffpc.com is where to go for that, as well as Dynasty Orphans. myffpc.com. I want to shout out Matt Price and our producer, Matt Deutsch. For those guys, I'm Eric Balkman. This has been the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. We'll be back at you next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. See you then.